When I was young, I believed that if you were super talented at something, you would almost like naturally succeed. It was almost like it was just meant to be. You would just have to like show up and people would naturally recognize your talent and you wouldn't really have to try so hard for it. But I think as time went by, I kind of noticed that that's not entirely true. I think a lot of what we have is like the raw talent, but it still needs to be cultivated. We still need to show up for it every day and have some sort of discipline and try different things and see how we can succeed with what we're given. It's not enough to just have that talent. It's definitely about what we do with it. And in that, we definitely need a certain level of discipline. But the thing with discipline is that it also can very easily tip into being quiet or rigid. If I look at online sources about a discipline, it's often really focused on just sort of pushing through discomfort, showing up regardless, maybe canceling other things that are important to you, all to achieve your goal. And I think it's very focused on the end result of the effort you put in there. And that's not really a healthy balance either, I believe. So, what I like to call gentle productivity is kind of like this balance. It is showing up and having a consistent routine and being committed and dedicated enough to show up even when you have self-doubt and just keep taking little steps along the way. But at the same time, it also means having self-compassion. It means that you allow yourself to be human and to grow at your own pace. And you don't need to be somewhere where you're not. You shouldn't compare yourself to others. You're just doing your part and focusing on doing little things every day to get to where you want to be. But at the same time, you also really celebrate your little wins. You really focus on like what you've learned, how you're growing and evolving, and you recognize that you have your own timeline for it. You don't have to be where somebody else is because you have unique needs and perhaps certain things take a little longer for you and then other things might be a little bit easier. And I think when you recognize that, when you have this deep dedication to show up while also having the deep self-compassion, that really creates this long-term sustainable success. It means that you don't burn yourself out. It means that you take enough rest and you get to have joy in the journey too, because that's super important too. When we get too rigid and when we really force ourselves to be very inflexible and really show up regardless of how you feel, it can become quite a task and it can feel like a heavy thing to do and no longer like a joyful thing where you're kind of learning and evolving as you go. And that's really a shame because obviously you wanted to do this at some point because it excited you. And I think it's really important to keep connecting with that along the way. So, what that balance usually looks like is having a routine that works for you. And that might take a couple of tries to figure that out. Like, how does your week look? And that means being really honest about the other things that matter to you. Like, how much time do you spend on friends and doing things like exercise or cooking or, all the other things that also matter to you. Being really honest about your routine. It's so much better to have a routine that you can stick to consistently rather than going a little overboard and then finding out it's too much and giving up altogether. Because I do feel like that's what usually happens when we put too much on our plate. It's just, at some point, it just becomes this whole thing and we just no longer want to do it. I used to do that when I went to the gym. I would either go nothing, no, never at all, or I would be like, okay, I'm gonna show up every single day, and then I would be so burnt out and tired that I would give up again. And I see that a lot with clients too. Like they start really active, but then as they keep pushing themselves, at some point they sort of go past that burden and they give up. So having a routine that really works for your life, for your needs, and something that you feel like you can do consistently is super important. And then it's also about like looking at your bits of growth and not comparing yourself to anybody else, but seeing like where are you growing and where are you doing better than you maybe did a few months ago, and allowing yourself to unfold in your own timeline. Another thing I think is really important is to not be so focused always on the end result, but just on the things you can do today. And even if it's like a super tiny step, just doing something today that will get you closer is so helpful. And sometimes when you look at the big goal, it can be so daunting and look like so far away. But if you look at it as like, what can you do today that just brings you one step closer? And then to really celebrate yourself for taking that step, that can be a great motivation to do that next step. It also means that you make space for your doubts, because your doubts and fears will probably show up. You're only human, that's a natural part of it. And I think when you give yourself space to feel those and to allow yourself to process that, that's really helpful too. A lot of it is also just like keep connecting to why you really want this. Like what inside you screams like you want to create this change for yourself. The more you do this from this genuine place of like wanting something better for yourself, the more pure it feels and the more naturally motivated you are. And you don't really have to force yourself into showing up as much because you feel that motivation. Gentle productivity is definitely a little bit of a trial and error. It's definitely seeing what works. But I think that's like kind of the part of it, is that you allow yourself space to see what works for you, to try different things, but to just keep connecting to that motivation and show up, even if it's in like a tiny way, even if it's not as much as you would like to do, but you show up consistently, you allow yourself to be messy and learn and grow at your own time. And then eventually you look back and you're like, wow, I can't believe I'm here now. And look at where I started.